Duke basketball is back. A game tonight coming up against George Mason. Everything you need to know today on Locked On Blue Devils.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. So excited to have you here with us on Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. Locked On Blue Devils is your one-stop shop where we discuss everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. And we've got a Duke basketball game coming up again tonight as the Blue Devils get set to take on the George Mason Patriots. We'll preview that game and so much more with our good friend Jordan Mann, who is of the Big J and Little J show. He's got wonderful YouTube breakdowns after each Duke game, so go check him out, and excited to have a conversation here with him today about this matchup against George Mason. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Be sure to also leave us a 5-star rating and written review on the Apple Podcast platform. The algorithms love that, and it helps us out so much when you're able to do that. Also, make sure that you watch our show each and every day on YouTube. A special shout out to all of our everydayers out there. Really appreciate your support with what you do in this Locked On community, and particularly here at Locked On Blue Devils. Comment down below as always. I love interacting with you guys in the YouTube comments. So let's get set. Let's bring them on in. Jordan Mann's here with us. We're talking about this game against George Mason. And first and foremost, just glad to have this game after a full week off. It was weird having a weekend without Duke basketball or Duke football for that matter. Unfortunately, we've got another 10-day break coming up soon from the 21st to the 31st when there's no Duke basketball going on. But Jordan, it's going to be good to see the boys back out there on the hardwood a little bit later tonight, man. Hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm doing good, JJ. I mean, look, there was no Duke, or really, it was a light sports weekend in general, but thank God for me. My brother got married this past weekend. I was best man at the wedding. So I had no focal point on any stress. So besides don't lose the rings, which was plenty of stress for me to deal with already.
No doubt.
Last year, if people aren't aware or new to the show, I was in Colorado for a wedding for the Duke Notre Dame football game. And, you know, I missed college game day. I missed the game in general. It was an all-time classic. Duke ended up losing, but I got a lot of crap from my friends and followers, obviously, rightfully so, missing a sporting event for weddings. But this past weekend, thank God there was a gap. And like you said, this is like the only game in 10 days. And that just wants me to remind everybody, if I'm not on this show for the next week, Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy holidays. And JJ, I'm excited to talk about Duke and celebrate Christmas with you today.
Let's do it. Let's dive in. I want to give a shout out to Jacob Mann as well on the wedding this past weekend. Super exciting. So as Duke gets set to take on George Mason, it's the 4th ever meeting all time between these two teams. And it's a Duke team, again, that's coming off a week without any competition, focusing on exams, getting those knocked out of the way, and now back to basketball in the non-conference setting. They've only got this game left, really, before they dive back in to ACC play. Again, Duke does have one more non-conference game on their schedule, but that's not coming until February when Duke takes on Illinois. Earlier today, Joe Lunardi of ESPN released a little bit of bracketology and has Duke as the number 1 overall 2 seed within the field, just missing out on that 1 seed line. I mention that because these non-conference games have been so important to date in terms of painting that NCAA tournament picture, because after this, then we really dive into ACC competition. When you're trying to make your tournament resume, it's now going to be up to Duke to take care of business against their conference opponents.
Yeah, look, Duke's going to have to really win with style points in the ACC and conference because the ACC has been so down. Clemson was they're the second best team, but then they just lost to Memphis, I think, at home. Yep. So they've dropped a little bit. Memphis is a good team, don't get me wrong, but the ACC needs another team to at least start stacking wins to help Duke's resume look stronger too. And one team in particular is UNC. Like, they need to start picking up and carrying their weight, because I think they're 1-5, I think, against tier 1 teams or whatever. I'm not that sophisticated in those charts, JJ. You probably will correct me because you are my stats guy, but pretty sure they're like 1-5 in tier 1 competition.
Yeah, they're not great so far this year, and it's odd because, you know, as Duke fans, we relish in the Tar Heel defeats, but also want to kind of promote the ACC and what it is. And so for North Carolina, they've got a massive week this week. That's why I kind of brought up that Duke is in this weird position of having just one more non-conference game against a 7-3 George Mason squad that Duke should win this basketball game. No excuses whatsoever there. But that's not the case for some other teams in the conference who have more high-profile games still on their schedule, the North Carolina Tar Heels being one of them. Tonight, North Carolina plays number 7 Florida in Charlotte. And then coming up on Saturday, the Tar Heels are going to play number 18 UCLA. So they still have opportunities to pick up big wins for the ACC. It's weird because we want them to lose, but we also really need some wins from other big high-profile teams within the ACC to kind of help carry the weight, because what this also does is when Duke slips up in ACC play, you and I are wise enough to know it will likely happen at some point. If the rest of the league moves up a little bit, those losses won't hurt Duke from a resume perspective as much.
Yeah, I mean, with Bill Belichick's new contract, does that $50 million go into him coaching basketball too, so he can start winning some ball games,
Yeah,
boost up the resume? But yeah, it's funny because I mean, NC State went to the Final Four last year, and that's like the most forgotten thing that happened last college basketball season. We don't even talk about that as college basketball coverage nationally because the ACC's been what it's been so far, and yeah, so we need some teams to really start stepping up to really lift this conference up, and because if not, then Joe Lunardi, as fair or foul for Duke, like number 1, 2 seed, they went 2-2 against the 4 games that were the toughest on the schedule. Obviously, went out against the non-con, including Illinois, who's a good ball club, and then I don't know, maybe try and not lose more than 3 conference games. But it's probably where I'd have Duke. Unfortunately, JJ. I know a lot of Duke fans want the 1 seed, but look, we're right before Christmas. Doesn't matter, right? Until you got to do what's in front of you, and then when it comes to the end of February, now we can talk about a 1 seed.
Without a doubt. So we'll see what Duke's able to do. We'll see what the rest of the ACC is able to do as well. Again, North Carolina's got Florida in Charlotte tonight. They play UCLA in Madison Square Garden on Saturday. Clemson has a big game tonight against South Carolina. That could also help the ACC bring down the SEC a little bit later. Those teams did not match up in the ACC-SEC Challenge. This is a classic rivalry game set to be played between those two teams. And then how about the Virginia Cavaliers, the Tony Bennett-less UVA Cavaliers, the TJ Power-led Virginia Cavaliers? They play Memphis at home tomorrow. Memphis, all of a sudden, shout out Nolan Smith, one of Penny Hardaway's assistant coaches this season. They're number 21 in the land. So just a few more opportunities here in the non-conference for the ACC to make some noise.
Yeah, we need it. We need it for the ACC. I miss it being a power basketball conference, and we need that back, JJ. So tonight's a good starting point.
No doubt. All right, well, we got to talk about George Mason, what they do well. Let's go down history and back down memory lane with some of these George Mason squads, and we'll do that after we take our first time out here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. All right, Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by the College Football Playoff. That's right, it's that time of year, and the College Football Playoff is back. It's the newly expanded 12-team format, guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. And then it's the Clemson Tigers looking to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max, proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. Do just want to give a shout out once again to all the everydayers, everybody out there supporting Locked On, and in particular Locked On Blue Devils. Here we are this week. The College Football Playoff is sponsoring our network. It's sponsoring this very show, and it's thanks to the good folks that watch us each and every day for pouring into the show that make this possible. So shout out Locked On, Jordan. Shout out the College Football Playoff. We love basketball. We really, really do. But hey, man, you and I love all sports, and the fact that we're getting 12 teams in a college football playoff and it starts this weekend, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on this show several times, Jay, talk about Duke football, and Duke was 2 wins away from being in the college football playoff,
Yep.
and that's not even far-fetched. They're winning in the fourth quarter of Georgia Tech, and then they lost by 1 against SMU in a game that historically never has happened. So you turn those 2 L's into wins, then we're talking about Duke football right now instead of Duke basketball. So shout out college football playoff and shout out to your everyday listeners.
I love it. All right, well, let's dive into this George Mason game. It's the fourth time ever that Duke's going to take on George Mason. They're 7-3 this year out of the Atlantic 10. The last time these two teams met was in December of 2006 when a young man by the name of John Shire was just a freshman on the Duke basketball team. He finished with 18 points and 6 assists in that one. So that game was in December of 2006. Earlier that year in April, so the basketball season prior, is when we saw Jim Larrañaga lead this George Mason squad all the way to the Final Four before losing to Florida, the ultimate national champions. That was the year that J.J. Redick and Sheldon Williams played their final games for Duke, losing to LSU in the Sweet 16. Going back down memory lane, that was really fun. That feels like one of the first true Cinderellas that I can remember actively rooting and getting all the way to the Final Four. Years later, you have the likes of VCU and Butler and Loyola Chicago making those big-time runs. But the fact that George Mason got there was epic, and it still stings that the number 1 seed Duke Blue Devils were upset by Glenn Big Baby Davis and the LSU Tigers, and J.J. Redick walked off the floor without a national championship in his college career, J-Man.
Yeah, and I think that Mason team knocked off UNC as well to go to the Final Four or during their Final Four run. So Jim Larrañaga, like in a personal connection, is I'm buddies with my best friend, is brothers with Jordan Miller, who played at George Mason, transferred to Miami. There's the Larrañaga connection from Mason to Miami, and
No doubt.
It's kind of cool to see how that's fast forward in the ACC play. And then obviously Miller had an outstanding 2 years in Miami. He went to the Final Four with Larrañaga in Miami. So it's kind of a small world there. But also, JJ, you look at the gauntlet of a schedule that George Mason had. I just got to point out one game in particular, and that is against my Ferrum Panthers, my alumni. We must have all had food poisoning that night. But we had a tough night. We lost by 45. But that's what happens with D1 against D3. But shout out to them. It was ESPN counted as a win. It was an exhibition game for the record. So you know what, ESPN, that's fake news. So far this season. So shout out the Ferrum Panthers.
You beat me to it, man. I was going to bring up your Ferrum Panthers because I saw that on the schedule and I said, wait a minute, J-Man, this is awesome.
That's a bye game for the record, bye game, and it's an exhibition. We're undefeated, so fake news by ESPN if you read off of that. Maybe it's a win for them and just a no contest for Ferrum. But, yes, shout out to my Ferrum Panthers. Relevant in this conversation for Duke George Mason as I can see a scouting report.
Well, let's dive into this game because last week we saw Duke play Incarnate Word. You and I both had the opportunity to be at that game. Really enjoyed spending some time with you there and watching Duke pick up the win. It was a game that Duke played without Malik Brown, and it was an Incarnate Word team that had no experience that season or this season whatsoever playing a power conference opponent, and they never will now that they've already played Duke. When you look at the rest of the Incarnate Word schedule, nobody else of importance matters here. Then you look at George Mason and almost a similar schedule as Incarnate Word in terms of the people that they're playing. Again, shout out to Ferrum of the D3 ranks and other schools like that. They have played Marquette, a team in the Big East, obviously one of the top teams in the country this season. And this George Mason squad was actually leading at halftime. They lost the game by 19, but that's because Marquette went on a 21-2 run to close out that game and win it by 19. So much closer than you might think when you're just looking at that score. Outside of that game, though, there haven't been many tests like this for George Mason. I bring all this up to say this Patriots team, I don't think they're going to be too scared. I think they're going to be ready to roll. And when you look at the roster, it's got a ton of Power 5 big-time conference transfers that are now contributing and playing for the Patriots.
Yeah, to touch base on Marquette real quick, I mean, they played at Dayton and lost at Dayton this past week as well, who's in the A10, and that just proves the point that the A10 is a basketball conference. It is it basically is a power conference to me. Like I'm very familiar with Davidson, and I'm very familiar with them and that roster and the staff, but like from top to bottom, like especially top heavy, the A10 is a very good league. It's a very strong league. You got Dayton, you got Richmond, who is not having the best year this year, but they've historically been pretty good. Davidson's history as well. George Mason, we've talked about, went to the Final Four 20 years ago. Like, these clubs are unbelievable. St. Louis had one of the best personalities in college basketball last year, the big fella. And then VCU, obviously, VCU's history. So, like, the A-10 is good ball. So, to your point, yes, George Mason, though they haven't played really anybody besides Marquette, they are not going to be fazed by walking into Cameron Indoor and seeing Duke across the chest of their opponent, because A-10's good ball. They're going to play to a higher standard. It's not going to be like Incarnate Word last week. And like you said, they have Power 5 transfers on that team, or Power 4 transfers on that team, to where they're not going to be phased. They want to come into Cameron and shock the world. And Duke has to be ready. And, well, I mean, let's face it, Duke has to come off to a faster start than they did against Incarnate Word.
George Mason's won 20 games for 2 years straight. This is Tony Skinn is their head coach. He was on that 2006 team that went all the way to the Final Four. You had Larinaga go from George Mason to being the Miami coach. Kim English did a good job with the George Mason program after that. He's now the Providence coach. So don't be surprised at all if you hear that name, Coach Tony Skinn, getting a bigger job, or maybe he likes coaching his alma mater and wants to stay there for quite some time as well. When you look at them, they've got a lot of outside shooting and scoring from really tough guards. Darius Maddox is their leading scorer right now by way of Virginia Tech. They've got another senior guard in Jalen Haynes, who's the leading rebounder for this squad. KD Johnson comes off the bench as a big spark plug for them. He started the last 2 years for Auburn and is a big-time contributor for George Mason. So a lot of experienced guards. Another big game in which tonight I think it's important for Tyrese Proctor, Sion James, and Caleb Foster to set the tone for the Duke side of things.
Yeah, like you just said, you just named off some dudes. George Mason has dudes, and it's going to be a good contest for Duke. It's kind of poor timing. I wish there was more George Mason last week and Incarnate Word tonight, because you're going into Christmas break with this 10-day stretch. But, yeah, like, Duke is going to have to be ready to have a fight. And we don't know the status of Malik Brown yet, do we?
Nope, no status updates. TBD.
So Malik Brown, I would assume, with this being the one game in 10 days, maybe they just rest him.
There is one game coming up on Saturday against Georgia Tech. We've got an ACC break on the 21st and then 10 days until the 31st.
My apologies. So I think he sits until that
ACC game.
Stretch. Yeah, which, if that is the case, that's going to stink, because I've said on this show, I think last time, that he's the Energizer Bunny. Like, maybe he should be the starter, because when he comes on the court, Duke just plays better. It's just what it is. Nothing against Common. Malawatch had a great game against Incarnate. And it's just Malik Brown brings something on the table, on the floor. If Duke is going to miss that tonight, then who is going to be that spark that's going to provide the energy that Duke needs to start fast for the first time, JJ, maybe all season?
Tonight's matchup between Duke and George Mason, interestingly enough, features two of the top 5 field goal percentage defenses in the nation. Let me say that again. 2 of the top 5 field goal percentage defenses in the nation. We talk about the Blue Devils being there at the tops of Ken Palm's defensive efficiency charts. When you look at just the field goal percentage mark itself, George Mason is 3rd in the entire country, over 350 plus teams in Division I basketball, teams shooting just 35.4% against George Mason. Duke is 5th in that regard, 36.2%. When you hear that, what does that mean, Jordan? How is George Mason able to get after teams like that?
They just love to create chaos. They just love to go after guys. I don't have their roster in front of me, JJ, but height-wise, I'm sure that means they're switching a lot of things, because they like their matchups defensively. I mean, that's what we've seen with Duke, right? So I'm going off of what Duke does and assuming George Mason does the same thing, because when you can switch 1 through 4, you're dictating the tempo of the offensive possession. And so Duke's done that so well this season. I think Mason's going to be like that tonight. And let's see what Shire can draw up. I mean, that's what people want to see is Shire. Can he, X's and O's? If this is a really good, solid defensive team that can break down one-on-one matchups where Cooper Flagg's not going to get his on an island, can we see Shire draw up some looks for Cooper Flagg or Knipple coming off screens or Isaiah Evans? And so can we see that tonight? And that would be the key to Duke winning tonight.
All right, we've got a few more thoughts about this game. And then again, an ACC game coming up on Saturday for Duke against Georgia Tech. I want to talk about that in just a moment here on this episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. It's where you need to be betting on all of the NFL action. I had a lot of fun last night with 2 games to be following and watching between the Vikings and the Bears, and then the Raiders and the Falcons. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is where you need to be to getting in on all of that excitement. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. Our show today is also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real sports money action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less than on at least 2 different players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long with Prize Picks, America's #1 daily sports app. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks. It's that place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. Join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in awards during Pickmas. Pretty fun play that they've got on words there with our friends at Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game, a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. Okay, Duke basketball's back tonight, taking on George Mason, 7 p.m. Eastern. Is how you can watch the Blue Devils in action against the Patriots. It's the 4th meeting all time. All 4 games will now be played inside Cameron Indoor Stadium, and Duke has won every single one of them. Our friends over at FanDuel have the Blue Devils favored by 19.5 points. And again, Malik Brown is still listed day-to-day. No update whether or not he's going to be able to go after spraining his toe in the win over Louisville. He did not play against Incarnate Word. An ACC game coming up on Saturday against Georgia Tech. You think the play here is to give Malik Brown just a little bit more rest?
I think, and if you're looking for big picture, I think it's, give him rest.
I can get there, yeah.
But I think, like, if he feels good, then you know what? Sit him against Mason and then play him against Georgia Tech, because conference is what matters here, right? Like, you got to win these games. And Georgia Tech was a pain in our side last year. Like, they just
lost in Atlanta. Yeah, we're going back to Atlanta on Saturday.
Yeah, lost in Atlanta last year. Proctor went down the first minute of that game, I think. And so, I would like him to be back for the Atlanta trip, JJ, and maybe sit him now. But I think that is the play in the long run. Like, I think I trust this Duke team to play without him and win. But I wouldn't blame Shire or Malik Brown. Be like, you know what, I'm ready to play. Let's hoop.
Last week we got to see more of Pat Ngamba II because of Malik Brown's absence. We also saw a career-high 17 points from Common Malawach. Once again, there's going to be a size advantage for Common in a game like this. There are bigger players on this George Mason team. They've got 1 7-footer on the roster, but still a great opportunity to get a big-time performance from Malawach. And the big thing for me, Jordan, build his confidence before we get into these ACC games and before we get into a tournament setting at the end of the year.
Yeah, one thing that I saw from Duke that I was really happy with against Incarnate Word was how aggressive they were looking for Common Malawach with the lob or dump down or something like that, to where I feel like we've missed him a lot. And also Common being the aggressor and showing his size, like, hey, throw it to me, and Duke finding him. Because you can point blame on both directions there. One's fading away, one's not looking. But they both came together against Incarnate Word when Duke was struggling shooting the ball. I thought they were building a new Cameron Indoor in the first half. They get back and painting it in, dominating inside, throwing it to the big fella. So use that height advantage again against George Mason. You got good guard play. Caleb Foster's great getting downhill. Sion James is a monster truck going downhill. Get downhill, throw lobs up, and let the big fella eat.
I feel good about Duke taking care of business tonight against George Mason, and then excited for them to get back in action against Georgia Tech this weekend. Take care of business tonight. ACC play still to come. And Jordan, I'm feeling a big Con Knippel game. Like if I'm predicting a leading scorer tonight for the Blue Devils, I think it's time for Con to get that shot. He was played well in the Incarnate Word game. Didn't really have to play too much because Duke had that game comfortably in control. But yeah, I'm going to go Con Knippel, leading scorer for tonight's game. What do you feel?
All right, I'm gonna put that in my book right now, JJ. And if it doesn't hit, then I'm never coming on the show again. There's no pressure.
A lot of pressure for me.
Yeah, no pressure at all that Con Knippel was leading the score tonight. But I do like that because he did show promise against Incarnate Word. I know inferior opponent, but the ball went in a couple of times from three. He got to the line. He played an all-around good game in the minutes he played, and I like that. I like that take, and I'm going to have to look into some of these books and see if I'm going to splash that as well.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so it's Jordan Mann here with us on the show today. Jay, you've got the Big J and Little J show. What are other ways people can support you, man?
Oh, man, JJ. So I have good news coming. Follow me on Twitter, JMan's Takes. For more, it will be out end of this week. I will tease it a little bit today or tomorrow, but exciting news for college basketball front as a whole. And then YouTube channel is JMan _ and yeah, Big J Little J shows podcast where you can find on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast.
Enjoy the basketball tonight, man. We'll talk soon, okay?
See you, buddy.
All right, that's Jordan Mann joining us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Go watch the Duke game tonight. Blue Devils and George Mason. And you can watch it on the ACC network. We'll be back tomorrow to recap the game. Looking forward to seeing all of our everydayers at tomorrow's show. That'll do it for today's show. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.